Governor Ron DeSantis says he backs the idea of banning local governments from collecting property taxes.
This is pinching people, and I think that's something that you should look at. You buy a home, you own it outright, free and clear, and yet you have to continue to pony up money to the government just for the courtesy of using your own property. We don't tax like that in almost any other instance.
There's a move in the Florida Senate to study the idea. If the ban were to happen, it would need to pass as a constitutional amendment with support from 60% of voters. However, it could force a rise in sales taxes and cuts to local government, including police, fire, and education spending. Here's Tampa City Council member Luis Vieira.
What's missing in politics is common sense. And people talk about these fancy $1 million studies, and I go, look, here's money that goes to support our cops and our firefighters. If you take it away, we will have a problem.
Vieira says that property taxes are preferable to sales taxes, which are regressive.
Property taxes are highly imperfect, but under a sales tax system, if you're Homer Simpson, you're going to be paying a much higher tax rate than Mr. Burns. And that's the bottom line of it is.
Patrick, what do you think? What would happen if property taxes were to go away and we were to rely on some other form of taxation?
Mr. Burns would save a lot of money. It's a bad idea. Sales taxes are regressive. They're also volatile. So you know, when you have big events happen, sometimes people will stop spending on large items, and therefore you don't collect as much sales tax. It's been a problem that we've had in the past in this state because sometimes we've had times when people have been spending here and we've had trouble come up with the money for education, things like that. The other thing is that, you know, you have some cities that don't have a very large retail base and don't have businesses in them that collect taxes. So if you have one of these small cities and you're no longer able to collect property taxes on the residences, well, those residences don't collect sales tax either. And so that means, you know, in Tampa you might be okay because you have stadiums and arenas that produce sales tax, but in places like Temple Terrace and Plant City and Newport Richey you might not be okay because you just don't have enough places to produce sales tax.
I've got to say though that the idea of finally maybe one day really truly owning a piece of property and not having to pay the government for it resonated with me. That's the one thing that really struck me in the press conference. I'm not saying that I entirely want to wipe out our property tax system, that I'm full scale on board with that right now with the way our budget is configured for the state, but I'm okay with us having a conversation about it and looking at it more closely.
Yeah, and it is wonderful to see folks who are in a position of authority to say, let's do the research, let's hear the different opinions, and let's talk about this with the experts, because politicians should not be deciding this. You know, the experts should be the ones looking at this carefully. We had Senator Jay Collins at the Tampa Bay Chamber speaking to our board, and he asked pointed questions. I want to know what you think. And there were different opinions in the room, and that is how we get to a good answer. You know, one of the things that we've found at the Chamber is our emerging leaders of Tampa Bay, the largest young professionals group in our region, 21 to 35 years old, and their number one complaint is the fact that attainable housing is not something that they can afford. And there's a difference between affordable housing and workforce housing. And so the programs and the resources that are available for affordable housing are not available to them because of their income structure. So we really do need to have a very serious conversation about how we provide more attainable housing, workforce housing for our young professionals.
Tara, what do you think about that? Is that the way to go to more affordable housing?
I think we all grumble about property taxes. Nobody likes to pay it. But $46 billion is what our property tax produces, and we have over a $100 billion budget. So this is going to be almost half, okay? So where are we going to get that money? And one of those big places that funds from property taxes, education. Half of our education is paid from property taxes. And you know, how voters are going to wonder how. Probably sales tax. And we know that sales tax does two things. It strips fiscal autonomy from local government, which most of us know is where real decisions affecting real people happen. And it also disproportionately affects those who are working families. And so, you know, is this going to be coupled with a tax reform from the national level? If so, that's going to make for a very interesting midterm election in 2026, because you're going to have voters having less change in their pockets, and they're going to go to the voting booth, and that may not work out well for those that are shepherding this in.
Patrick,
Patrick, I think the Republican pushback might be, well, you're going to give this tax is going to fall heavily on visitors to the state, on the tourists.
It could, but when you talk about having a good conversation, it's a bad conversation. We start off with, let's get rid of property tax. The conversation should be, how are we going to tax people? Because we're going to shift this taxation. We're not getting rid of a tax. We're just going to shift it. And so while there were going to be some visitors that are paying this, I know a lot of people have 20, 30 pieces of property and they've got three-person household. So they're going to stop paying a whole lot of tax and they're going to get a little bit of sales tax increase when they go to the grocery store. It's no big deal for them. Poor people are going to pay a lot more in the state of Florida. Working people are going to be paying a lot more. And so that's the real problem.
Adjustments to homestead could potentially take care of that.
Mitigate that.
Yeah, but you're doing away for the property tax, so there's no more homestead.
Well, I'm saying if
benefit.
maybe that would be a fallback position entirely instead
I
of
see.
entirely wiping out.
A midway position.
Maybe
I got
there's
you.
an increase to homestead exemptions.